everyone, ready to dive into something incredible. Today we're tackling evolution. You know, that force that's shaped every single thing living on this planet. Seriously, from the teeniest bacteria, and you know how small those guys are, to those massive blue whales.
And the best part? It's a story that's still being written, constantly changing, and honestly, the way evolution works is often way different from how we'd guess.
So true. And lucky for us, you sent over this really cool PDF, all in Hebrew, called, get this, i8.pdf. It's basically set up like a presentation about how evolution actually works, and it's got images, examples, even quiz questions.
Yeah, it's like the perfect launch pad to really wrap our heads around some seriously mind-blowing stuff. Like, even IS evolution. I mean, we throw that word around.
Right, like we think we know. Okay, so let's break it down. People always say survival of the fittest, but it's got to be more than that, right?
It's way more. Think of it like this. Evolution is all about how entire populations change over time, like a giant game of genetic telephone, where each generation whispers a slightly different version of the message.
So those tiny changes, those little whispers, those are actually super important.
Hugely. They're where all the action happens. Just picture a field full of flowers. Some might end up taller than others, or maybe some have brighter petals, all because of teensy differences in their genes.
It's like each flower's got a slightly different deck of cards, right? Dealt out by their parent flowers.
Exactly. But then the environment swoops in, like the dealer in our card game, deciding which cards or traits actually get to play. That's where natural selection takes over.
Okay, so natural selection is the dealer, but what makes it such a fascinating part of evolution?
Well, the presentation talks about this study with guppies, and it's really cool. So picture a river full of these guppies. Now, if that river has a predator that really likes to munch on the bigger fish, what do you think happens?
I'm guessing the smaller guppies would have a better chance, right?
You got it. The smaller, faster-growing guppies are more likely to survive, and, here's the key, pass on those small and speedy genes to their guppy babies.
So it's not like the guppies are deciding, let's be smaller. It's just that being smaller gives them a survival advantage, and that's what gets passed down.
Exactly. Over time, the average guppy size in that river actually shrinks. It's a perfect example of how even tiny pressures from the environment can lead to some pretty big evolutionary changes in a species.
It's like the environment is this invisible hand, almost, sort of guiding how species evolve, but it's not always slow and steady, right? Doesn't evolution have like a wild side?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes evolution goes a little haywire, and that's where genetic drift comes in. It's anything but predictable.
Genetic drift. So if natural selection is like the careful editor, is genetic drift more like that random author just throwing curveballs into the story?
Perfect analogy. Okay, picture this. A massive wildfire tears through a forest. It wipes out a huge chunk of, say, a population of squirrels. Now, the squirrels left standing, they might not perfectly represent what the genes were like before the fire, maybe. Completely by chance, they all had thicker fur.
And just like that, thick fur becomes the thing for those squirrels, even if it wasn't such a big deal before the fire.
Totally. It's like some random event just hit shuffle on the evolutionary playlist.
Yeah.
This is especially important in smaller populations, by the way. The presentation actually shows this with a really cool picture. A seabird carrying a seed to a new island.
Wow, so one bird just doing its thing could completely change the course of evolution for that island. Talk about the butterfly effect in action.
It's incredible. It just goes to show that evolution isn't some straight line, from point A to point B. It's this wild, unpredictable dance between natural selection and pure chance, always keeping things interesting.
So we've got natural selection kind of fine-tuning things and genetic drift shaking things up. It's like this crazy dance over millions of years, but how do we get from these tiny changes to like whole new species? That's the part I never really wrap my head around.
Yeah, it is pretty wild, right? That process, it's called speciation. And usually it starts with, well, a bit of a breakup.
A breakup? You mean like when my go-to coffee shop closed?
Kind of. But in this case, it's geographic isolation. Think mountains shooting up, canyons splitting the land, or even just a group getting stuck on an island. Like that seabird carrying the seed we were talking about.
Right, like a big moment for part of the population. So once they're physically separated, things get interesting, right? Like, evolution-wise.
Totally. Now they're dealing with completely different environments, different challenges, and natural selection. It starts favoring different traits in each group. It's like they're on different paths now. And throw in a little genetic drift, just for fun.
Oh boy, now things are getting really different, but like, how different are we talking here?
Over time, they can become so different that even if you put them back together, they wouldn't even recognize each other as the same species. Maybe their mating rituals have changed, or their breeding seasons are totally off, or their genes are just way too different to even make baby animals together anymore.
So no more love connections for those exes. Ouch.
Exactly. That's reproductive isolation, the real sign of a brand new species. And it's often driven by those changes in the environment, plus, of course, good old unpredictable chance.
Speaking of chance, the presentation talks about how a change in the environment actually pushed some mice to become nocturnal. It makes you think.
It shows that evolution, it's not about some end goal or being better. It's about adapting to whatever life throws your way. There's no finish line, just constantly changing and adapting to survive. But here's the thought. What happens when a new player enters the game? One that can change the environment itself.
You're talking about humans, right? We're not just sitting on the sidelines in this game anymore. We're players now.
Exactly. We're changing the rules, whether we mean to or not. The presentation actually uses dog breeds as an example, and it's something we don't even think about. Think about a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. They came from the same wolf ancestors.
Whoa, I totally forget that sometimes.
Right. We've been shaping dogs for ages, picking the traits we like, the look, the personality, and just breeding for those things.
So we're like not evolutionary matchmakers.
We've become these incredibly powerful forces when it comes to evolution, whether we realize it or not. And that brings up a whole new level of, well, complexity. Because now we're not just adapting to the environment, we're actually shaping the evolutionary journeys of other species.
It's kind of wild when you really think about it.
It really is, yeah.
Like we started talking about teeny changes in guppies, and now humans are basically steering the evolution of other species.
It's true. It's like we've become a force of nature in our own right. We're changing the world. And I don't just mean like building stuff, you know.
It makes you wonder what's next for evolution. I mean, with everything changing so fast, where do we even go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it? But here's the thing about evolution. It's not exactly a crystal ball.
More like a choose your own adventure.
Right. Exactly. With every choice we make, we're basically writing a new chapter.
So even if we can't predict the future of evolution, we can at least be aware of what role we're playing.
Absolutely. We've got a responsibility to try and understand the impact of our choices, not just on other species, but on us too, you know?
Well said. We've gone through a lot today, from natural selection, like that fine-tuning process, to genetic drift, which is kind of a wild card.
And then there's the incredible diversity of life. It's all thanks to this one amazing process.
It's crazy to think about. Every single plant, every animal, they all exist because of evolution. All those little quirks and adaptations.
Billions of years in the making, and the story's still unfolding all around us.
That's a pretty awesome thought to wrap up on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.